Hi Bernhard, what
Hi,
are we
Carsten.
showing this video?
As the title says, this one is a cluster housekeeping session, right? Um, and we are showing some things, or at least the final status of the things that we did. For example, we need, as it is an Azure Stack HCI cluster, we need to register it. We did that before in the previous video series. This is the session to watch, right? We just show you the result, right? So that,
Mhm.
we prove that we have done this step. And then we do some other things, which we talk in detail in this video, number 15, the cluster housekeeping of the other series, the generic installation series, where we did, talk about creating a witness and also performing some cleanup stuff on the networking, like renaming the cluster networks for better understanding and for better troubleshooting, right? So we will do the steps or at least show you the outcome. And this is what we do in the video. And I think we start with showing you the registration status, right?
Yeah.
So if you want to switch over to your screen.
Yes, I want. So here, now you see Windows Admin Center,
Mhm,
and I included the cluster in the Windows Admin Center portal.
mhm,
If you look down here, it's a bit weird. We don't have volumes and we have disks.
mhm,
Usually, we would have devices and volumes here. So
mhm,
in the moment, Windows Admin Center thinks it's a usual Hyper-V cluster, but it has recognized that it's not, or
mhm,
that it's some kind of HCI. So it's kind of them in the middle.
mhm.
And
Yeah.
here you see this part is when we have an HCI, an Azure Stack HCI cluster, we have to register it in Azure, as we mentioned
Mhm,
in the other series multiple times.
mhm,
That we already did. So you see
mhm,
here it's registered and it's
mhm,
also ARC enabled. And to have
mhm,
a look at that, we go here to the Azure resource.
mhm. And in regular intervals, the cluster will report back to Azure to say it's online and it's connected. And we did that in 15 minutes ago, so that's why you see that number here, right? So one.
Exactly.
Okay.
So we also see here, if we click on nodes, the
Mhm,
nodes are ARC enabled, they are
mhm,
connected, everything is fine. Yeah.
mhm. So the
As it,
individual, yeah,
yeah, as it
component
should
is
be.
installed on in each node. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Mhm,
So this is this, and then we have another thing, the witness.
mhm,
If we go back to the dashboard and go to settings.
mhm. So you used Windows Admin Center for creating the witness or for setting the witness. We have talked in this video series about it. So you need to, we do have a stretch cluster, 2 sites, right? And it would
Mhm.
be good to have an independent resource living on not on site 1 nor on site B. So this one will live in Azure and be hopefully up. And
Up
so
and
does
running, yes.
as
Azure
gate.
usually is up.
Yeah. Okay.
99.9999% of the time. Not
Yeah.
100%, but
Yeah.
a
Okay. So you did
huge
that here.
nines.
Okay.
Yeah.
All
So
good.
we
So.
set it here exactly. But if you
Mhm,
do that in this state, the cluster
mhm.
doesn't know really that's an Azure Stack HCI cluster. So it would also offer us a disk witness. Yes.
Right.
You have to
Right.
choose a cloud witness or
Mhm,
a file share witness. Disk witness is not supported with an Azure Stack HCI cluster, and especially not in a stretch scenario.
mhm,
So let's have a look at the witness. I go back to the resource here, and the
mhm,
witness is also in our
mhm.
resource group of the
Oh, okay.
cluster. Here you see we used our
Storage
storage
account.
account.
Correct.
We had used in the other video series before,
Mhm,
and here we see the container, and this Bernard showed me because I'm not the cloud witness guy. Here is our witness,
mhm.
and there we have a
Okay.
container. It's also very new from today.
Mhm,
So if we now switch to the failover cluster manager, the old tool, and we
mhm,
can connect to our cluster.
mhm,
It's already pre-filled here, so I don't have to type it in. Yeah, and we see we have our cluster. Here's our cloud witness.
mhm.
So it's the
Correct.
same cluster. We have only one warning, and that's perfectly fine. Yeah. And
Yes.
you see here, we will care about this. We have 14 IPv4 networks,
Mm.
0 IPv6, and the names are very,
Yeah.
very clear which
Not.
network is which, right?
Yeah. So let's do
So
some
let's
housekeeping on the networks. Yeah. Let's have a look there. Okay.
so if we go to network, you see
Yeah.
here we have our 14 networks.
Hmm.
Two stand out a bit. These are
Hmm.
network 14 and 7. They are cluster and client, and that should be our management networks. We see
Hmm.
that here. Yeah, this is the management network on the two nodes in the even side and this on the odd side. But to be perfectly clear,
Yeah.
um, if we had some problem, so the cluster is fine with this
Yeah.
naming convention,
Mm.
but if you have problems and you find in the event logs cluster network 11 is partitioned,
Mm.
so I prefer to rename them to more speaker
Self-explanatory name.
names
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
yeah. So and if we rename them, our names are maybe not so perfect here, but they are a bit better than this.
Hmm.
So
Yeah. Okay.
we could do
Let's do
that.
it, but not manually, maybe, right?
Yeah,
So you used a lot of scripts for doing that,
yeah.
and it might be interesting for the
But
guys to see your
let me
script as well.
just show them how you
Yeah.
would
Okay.
do it
Yeah.
manually. So you click on the network, you have properties, and then you can
Right.
rename the network. Yeah.
Hmm.
But we have a script for that because it's a lot of networks, and we do some other things in the script too.
Hmm. Okay.
So let's go to one host.
Hmm.
Yeah, our first node, and here you see the script. We do some other things. So we will set the block cache to 16 gigabytes because we have a lot of RAM memory in those systems.
Hmm.
We want to have 5 live
Hmm.
migrations in parallel. So
Hmm.
I take this
Hmm.
stuff here
Hmm.
and let it run. It's
Okay.
just some constants. And then here, this is the definition of the different networks. So you remember we have different IP subnets for every network. This is, for
Hmm.
example, management network 1.
Hmm.
That's the odd one because it's an odd number. Here we have the even one.
Yep.
And here we have the name. So I want to
Hmm.
have this network management O for management odd.
Hmm.
And this is management E for the management in the even part,
Yep.
right? So let's include all of those
Yeah. Yeah.
up to
Good.
here and set our variables.
Okay. Got
Yeah.
it. Then you do
So
some
first we can
settings.
do the networking stuff. The other
Yeah,
stuff we
I
come back
think
to.
you can do the block cache size, right? I mean, you talked about it, setting the variables.
Okay.
It's a little bit on top. All right.
Yeah,
I
we
would
will
do it.
do that. So just doing the block cache size. So
Hmm.
this will reserve 16 gigabytes of memory
Hmm.
on every Hyper-V node for the read I/O. So
Hmm.
it's an online cache.
Yep.
And we also change the repair speed. We discussed that, or we set the repair speed
Hmm.
of the storage spaces direct
Hmm.
pool.
Which
Oh,
we
we have
don't
a
have
problem
at
here.
this stage. We
It's
don't have.
exactly right. So this is it's
Let's
an
do it later.
unexpected error for me, but of course it's explainable because we don't
Yeah,
have any storage spaces
yeah,
direct yet.
let's do it later.
Okay, so this
But
is
the live
we will,
migrations you could do, right?
yeah, I think
That's
so.
would be.
We will do that. And this is a small script that sets on. Do we have the cluster nodes? I don't think so. So we have to get the cluster nodes here.
Let's see.
Very
Maybe
good. Let's see. So
live
I
coding.
don't think we have cluster nodes. Let's see here. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
it's empty. So we do, so this is live, right? Cluster node. We just do it. This will, this will give us an, I would say, an array
Hmm.
of the nodes. Yeah, just do it again. And now you see we have our 4 nodes
Hmm.
that are part of our cluster.
Hmm.
And this script will go in a
Hmm.
for each loop through all the nodes and
Hmm.
enable the live migration, set
Hmm.
the authentication type, set the live migration to SMB. We have done this in our test
Hmm.
before, but now let's do it consistently on every node.
Okay,
That's
good.
also done. Yeah.
Hmm.
And now we come to the part where we rename our cluster
Hmm.
networks. And we
So
have
you
to
look
talk
up the,
about the replica
yeah,
nets a bit, but
yeah,
first let me set it and then we will
yes.
talk about it, why we do that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's a good visual to do it in the failover cluster manager. Might be a little bit easier to do
Yeah.
that.
There,
Okay.
there is also a backup net that we don't have
Have.
here
Hmm.
yet.
Okay.
So this error is also something that I looked I missed it in the
Yeah. No
where
worries.
where
I
I
mean,
checked them.
we don't have it, but we let's maybe talk about the backup network or the requirements for backup network. But yeah,
But we do that later, right?
yeah. Okay.
So
Cool.
here is the result of our renaming of the network. So we don't have cluster network 1 to 14 anymore. We have a
Hmm.
little bit clearer names.
Yep.
And first is what the network is doing. So this is the SMB1 network, for example, but in
Hmm.
the even size, you see for the
Correct.
two nodes.
Hmm.
And we have also another SMB network in the even side. We should also find those adapters here, but I think this is something that is, yeah, here we are. It's just a failover
Refresh problem.
cluster is a running remote. Sometimes it has its
Hmm.
flaws, so you have to refresh the picture.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Hmm.
so you see here we have our two SMB even, we have our two SMB odd, we
Hmm.
have two cluster networks even,
Hmm.
we have two cluster networks odd, we have our
Hmm.
management odd and
Hmm.
our management even. So far
Okay.
so good, and we have our replication networks.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So maybe we talk about the different uses for or why you are setting, or which kind of settings you have chosen for the different networks, right? I
Yeah.
mean, because
So
it's important.
yeah. So our management networks are used for internal cluster communication and external cluster communication. So we have to communicate with the domain, um,
Hmm.
DNS. We have to go to Azure
Hmm.
for our witness, for the registration, for the billing. So
Hmm.
these are the two external speaking networks. Yeah.
Correct. Hmm.
Then we have cluster only networks. So these are networks that are only used in this cluster. The
Hmm.
cluster can't use them to communicate to other systems outside of the cluster. And we
Hmm.
see we have a lot of them. I can do this,
Hmm.
so we
Hmm.
can order it by the usage. So we have our
Hmm.
management with cluster and client.
Yep.
Then we have SMB,
Hmm.
yeah, the SMB networks. Yeah,
Hmm.
the cluster networks are used for cluster communication.
Hmm.
That's perfectly fine. We want to use the SMB network in the cluster to update our extents, to live migrate in the site. We talked about all the different network
Yep.
uses in the previous videos.
Hmm.
And when you look here, what's special is the replica networks are
Hmm.
on none. And if
Hmm.
we look at the properties, what does none mean? Do not allow cluster network communication on this network.
Hmm.
So this is weird, right?
Hmm.
Um, we want to have our replication traffic over these networks.
Hmm.
Now, there are for this use case to replicate the data from one side, the storage data from one side to the other side. But this
Hmm.
is not, yeah, this is not really a cluster network, it's a replication network. So a replication can use those networks, and we have to tell the replication that it
Yeah.
should use those networks. We will do that later. Yeah?
I mean,
But
for clarity reasons, I mean, people might, might think, hey, is this a cluster job or is this a replication system job? It's, for more transparency, I think none is maybe not the best word for it, right? Because it indicates that the cluster doesn't care at all.
yeah,
But it is still used for replication traffic. The only thing is it's not used by the cluster for any other cluster related stuff then,
yeah.
right?
So
Um,
let's also give another example. If
mm,
we would have an iSCSI SAN, so a
mm,
SAN in a Hyper-V cluster, and usually you also configure the iSCSI network, the storage networks,
mm,
also with none. So you
mm,
only want the
mm,
storage only want the storage traffic, the iSCSI traffic on those networks, not cluster traffic like database updates, heartbeat, maybe even redirected I/O. We
Mm,
also will see here. We don't want that on those
mhm,
iSCSI networks, and the same is here.
mhm,
We only want replication traffic on our replication networks. We don't want to see a live migration there if we
mm.
go to the other side. We spoke about that.
Yep.
So
Yep.
this tells the cluster, don't use those networks, for example, for heartbeat. Yeah?
Mhm,
Don't use those networks for the cluster database update, for
mhm,
cluster redirection.
mhm,
We don't allow the cluster to use those networks for those traffic. We have plenty other
mhm,
networks, even
mhm,
intersite. So
mhm,
our SMB networks are only in the site, but we have our separate cluster networks and we have management for a
mhm.
heartbeat, for example. Yeah?
Okay.
So
Cool.
this here we tell the cluster, don't use those networks for all the
Mhm.
cluster traffic. It's only for replication.
Okay.
Okay.
So I think we are done with the housekeeping stuff.
Yeah.
We have the witness, we have it registered, we have cleaned up the storage, the networks, right? And
I
anything
think
else?
we are good to go to create our storage.
Yeah, the only thing that you might want to do is, can we have a look at the cluster and see which IP address for the cluster node is online?
Okay. We talked about that before, right? And you
Mhm,
said we will look at it. So
mhm,
it's here we have scroll bars here. So
mhm.
if we go on the cluster, we have different, let's say, points here. Yeah,
Yep. Mhm,
configuration. These are jump points to the different parts in failover cluster managers. And
mhm.
here we have the cluster core resource. And we see here we have our cloud witness.
Correct.
Perfect. And
Mhm,
here is our server name. We
mhm,
only see the server name and we
mhm,
see the cluster infrastructure virtual machine cluster VMI. So
mhm.
not really the network, but if we click on this little plus here,
Yes,
we will
expanded.
see our cluster has two
Mhm,
IP addresses. We gave him
mhm.
the 50 in the odd network
Yep.
and in the even network. And
Mhm.
in the moment, we see here our current host server is running on the node 4.
Even.
Yeah, this is part of the even side. So
Mhm.
that the host server, we
Okay.
use the management address of the host server and it's in the even side. So we have to
Okay.
use the cluster is presented in the even subnet, not in
Okay.
the
So
odd.
yeah,
So what do
let's
we do?
move.
We move it, right?
Yes, let's move the
Let's
cluster.
move it, move it. Oh, how
The
was it in
cluster
the beginning?
owner.
Yeah. So we move the core cluster resource, and
Right.
here it's called the host server. Here's the core cluster resource. We
Mhm.
select the host, and we are on the even side. So we want to move it, let's say, to the third
Yeah.
node. It's in the odd side.
Mhm.
And you see here the cluster is going offline.
Mhm.
And failover cluster manager is talking to the cluster over this core cluster resource. So maybe it takes a while. The cluster is maybe already there again, but the failover cluster can't read it. So it can
Yeah.
happen that
The
we have to use a
right.
refresh. Yeah. And now
Yeah.
you see it's online again.
I realized that sometimes you need to do a refresh on this one. To be
Yeah.
honest.
So here you see it's now on the
Mhm.
odd
Yeah.
side. That's okay, but it
Correct.
states here still that it's a node 4, and that's not updated. So
And
if we do a
another
refresh here,
refresh. Yes. Yeah.
you see it's
Okay.
the
Got it.
third one. So if you
Okay. Cool.
manage with failover cluster remotely your cluster, I noticed many times that you have to use a refresh button quite often because
Mm.
there is a let's say a discrepancy between what it's shown and what the cluster is really
Mhm.
having. So here
Not a real
now,
time tool.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's not real time and sometimes it needs a refresh. Yeah. So now we moved to the odd side. Our node
Mhm.
is in the odd side. It has only an IP address in the odd subnet, and here we are.
Mhm.
So it will move
Okay.
around the cluster core resource depending on which node it is and in which side this node is, and then the management
Mhm.
network has a different subnet. So this is
Okay.
why
Good.
our cluster needs two IP addresses in both subnets, in both management networks, one IP address. Good point, Bernard. I would have forgotten this, but
No worries. I mean, that's why I'm here. Okay. Cool. I think that's it.
Yeah,
So see you in the next video for the storage part, right? So we are going to enable the storage now.
we do that. So see you soon.